Hello students, Mr. Young here. Welcome to Chapter 3, Lesson 2. Back in Lesson 1, we learned about the Roanoke colony, what happened, who knows, and then we learned about the Jamestown colony down there in Virginia, basically a money-making venture of the Virginia Company. Today, we're going to focus on the New England colonies. So let's talk about that. The settlers of Jamestown, well, like I said, it was basically a business venture. The settlers were that we're going to talk about today left their homeland for a different reason. They wanted religious freedom. And that all kind of started off from an event that stemmed in 1534. King Henry VIII was a man of, shall we say, questionable morals. Basically, he wanted to end his marriage with his current queen. He wanted to get it annulled, which is like in the Catholic religion, that's like, oh, never happened. It's like a do-over, not like a divorce so much. But the Pope wouldn't annul his first marriage, so he said, you know what? Fine, I'm going to make my own church where I'm in charge, and I'm going to annul my own marriage. And that's what he did, and you end up with the Church of England, aka the Anglican Church. Now, the population, of Britain, they all met this in many different ways. You had some of them, a lot of them just converted, like, okay, we're Anglican now. And some stayed Roman Catholic, and generally, if you weren't Anglican, you were met with some trouble. There were two subgroups, religious subgroups in Britain at the time, and they existed because they had different relationships with the Anglican Church. For example, the Puritans wanted to reform or purify the Anglican Church. There were some big changes they wanted to have made. And then the Separatists wanted to totally break away and separate from the Anglican Church. They wanted to have their own church, not just improve the one that already existed. So there's the two subgroups we're going to really talk about today, the Separatists and the Puritans. We'll start with the Separatists. The Separatists weren't really treated very well in England, and as a result, in 1620, a group of them decided to move to America. They are what we call the Pilgrims. These Pilgrims were able to get a grant of land from the Virginia Company, and they would be allowed to move to Virginia and start their own colony where they could practice their own religion freely. And England was like, great, we're going to get rid of these weirdos. The trouble is that they got off course and ended up landing all the way north at Plymouth Rock. They went over on a ship that you may have heard of, the Mayflower, and they landed in December. Way up north in the northeast there. It was already getting cold. It was not a very good turn of events. So not only were the Pilgrims off course and landing way up north, but they landed in December. That'd be like landing, you know what it's like here in the northeast in December in the winter. You don't have a lot of time to get things ready before a deep winter hits. So that's how the Pilgrims ended up there. Now, so we have the Pilgrims. They're coming over. Going to make their own, place where they can worship freely. It's December. In order to facilitate their survival, they said, we need some rules. We need a government to help us survive. And so they created their own government with what they called the Mayflower Compact. They did that before they even got off the boat. The Mayflower Compact is considered a key step in the formation of democratic governments in the United States. What's not often mentioned is that this first initial government they set up was like a commune, so like everybody shared everything, and differing events, but some people will argue that this commune lifestyle contributed to a lot of that suffering that occurred in that first winter, and everybody knows about the suffering of the Pilgrims in the first winter. They wouldn't have survived if not for the help of Samoset and Squanto, the two natives that taught them how to hunt and helped them build some wigwams and things like that to help them survive the winter. I think they say half the people died that first winter. It said that after that epic failure, they converted to a private property system, which is much more akin to what we sort of use the standard here in the United States today. There's Samoset and Squanto. Now, back to that first winter, half the Pilgrims died of illness, starvation, or exposure to the cold. If not for the help of the two natives, Squanto and Samoset, everyone probably would have died. Let's see. Oh, they also helped them ally themselves start good relations with the local natives, the Wampanoag. We're actually going to learn more about Squanto and Samoset with our Thanksgiving lesson that we'll do, much further down the line here in November. All right, let's talk about some other new colonies. So that's the Pilgrims that landed at Plymouth Rock. In 1629, a group of Puritans, different from the Separatists are Pilgrims. In 1629, a group of Puritans, which are different, they wanted to purify the Anglican Church. They got permission from the King of England to set up their own colony north of Plymouth, there in Massachusetts. In 1630, a guy by the name of John Winthrop led a group of some 900 Puritans to settle what would become Boston, Massachusetts. They called it the Massachusetts Bay Colony. As more and more Puritans moved into the new Massachusetts Bay Colony, they demanded more say in the government. The colony became a little more democratic. What's ironic about the Massachusetts Bay Colony is that the Puritans left England because of the lack of religious tolerance, and then they set up their own Massachusetts Bay Colony, which was like the most intolerant colony of the colonies. They abhorred non-Puritans. Okay, so kind of, talk about the pot calling the kettle black. This strict intolerance led to the formation of a lot of the other North, New England colonies. You can see them all mapped out here. So there's Plymouth, Pilgrims, the Separatists at Plymouth, the Puritans move into Boston, and then we're going to talk about the formation of the rest of these. So, for example, in the 1630s, a group of Puritans began settling what is now Connecticut. They were led by a man by the name of Thomas Hooker. Hooker did not like the way Winthrop was running Boston, so him and his followers packed up and formed their own town called Hartford. There it is. In 3 years, they had formed their own colony of Connecticut, so they broke off from Massachusetts. In 1639, they adopted what was called the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut, which was the very first constitution in the colonies. Next, we're going to have Rhode Island, New Hampshire. There's Rhode Island. There's New Hampshire. There was a fellow in Boston named Roger Williams, and he did not like the intolerant ways of his fellow Puritans, so he broke off and actually went to live with the natives. He also didn't like how the natives were being treated, so he went off to live with the natives. The radical ideas that, that got him kicked out of the colonies was this: you should be nicer to the Indians. We don't like you being so intolerant. So he went off and made his own settlement with some land that was sold to him by the natives. He called his little town Providence, and it became a settlement and safe haven for dissenters because he allowed you to practice any religion you wanted. In 1638, another group of dissenters, led by John Wheelwright, formed the town of Exeter in New Hampshire, right there, which became an independent colony in 1679. So you ended up starting here with your Pilgrims in Plymouth, those rowdy Puritans in Massachusetts, and then people kept breaking off to form new colonies because they didn't like the Puritan rule of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Interesting stuff. Real quick, as the settlers expanded and grew in the colonies, they took over native lands, mostly with no payment or permission. While many traded with the settlers, many natives traded with the settlers, conflicts began to arise. In 1675, one tribal leader of the Wampanoag waged war on the colonists. This was called King Philip's War. King Philip, his Indian name was Metacomb, but the people called him King Philip. He was that chief of the Wampanoag. The war was pretty brutal, lasting 14 months. It is said that the war was fought between more or less the grandchildren of the very same natives and pilgrims that had dined and supped at the first Thanksgiving. So a very unfortunate turn of events. The colonists won, and this more or less broke sort of the military power of the natives within that New England area, more or less allowing them to expand. If you want to learn more about King Philip's War, there's a lot more details to it. I linked about a 10-minute video to the picture here. You can take a look at it. It looks a pretty cool looking picture. Everyone looks real hardcore, even with the funny hats, the pilgrim hats. That's it. You've got a quiz on the next page, a few attempts if you need them. If you have any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, have a wonderful day, okay?